All right, let's talk about the first poem in On Wings of Gauze. What indications, expectations, what questions do we get just from reading the first poem? So one thing we see is form. We see that the poem is written in free verse with short lines, medium-sized stanzas, mostly lowercase, very little punctuation. So a question we might have for ourselves is this going to be a form that is used throughout the text? And you can kind of look through and see that the majority of it does reflect that kind of style, though there are some places of deviation. Even within the very same poem that we're talking about. We can also look at the language and see that the language is very conversational. There are no words here in this particular poem that we have to look up the meaning to. And part of that is determined by the fact that she's writing a fable. So fables are typically written for a person of any class, socioeconomic class, to understand, and a person of any age to understand and be able to get some kind of moral out of. So part of that is determined by her style, and part of it is determined by the fable storytelling mode that she's using. And so then you can ask the question of, well, did she choose the fable mode because of her own inclinations as a poet, or did the fable influence the way she wrote this particular poem? The language is narrative, common diction, which we already talked about, and then this is something that might not be important to anybody else, but one thing I notice about Nikky Finney's work is that she will put two items in a list. So she will say this and this, joined with a conjunction or joined with the implicit conjunction. So in this poem, an example would be, she wished, asked, right? The young girl wanted 3 hands and no eyes, and then there's like an implicit punctuation there before we get to another item of 2, where no one would ever come to visit or come to leave. Such an uncommon gift, always to be lauded upon or made mention of. And there are these items of 2 in a list. The reason I noticed this is because back in school, one of my teachers called me on it and was like, come on, in the US, we either say the one thing or the 3 things, or the list is longer. We don't really do the 2 things or the 4 things, Candace, so like, figure that out. You don't need to say things twice. And in my mind, I was like, well, Nikky Finney does it. But of course, as a student, I mean, I was also like, well, Langston Hughes asks questions in his poems. Why can't I ask questions? But you're a young poet. It's like, Candace, just answer some questions. Candace, just figure out the one thing you need to say. Stop saying 2 things. So I get it. But that's one thing that is particular to her style that I've noticed in her bibliography. So let's not harp on that too much. The fable mode. So she starts the poem with once upon a time, once there was a da-da-da-da. So once a younger girl, and we get that storytelling mode just through the use of the word once. We get very specific vagaries, right? A younger girl, specific but not very specific, stood on a shore, of the shore of some great ocean. So even as she continues the explanation, continues the description, it doesn't necessarily get more concrete or more defined. It gets vaguer and vaguer. A girl, a place, a shore, even the beings with large ears and magnificent legs. That gives us description, but it doesn't really give us anything to hold on to. And so in that way, it's playing with this fable tradition, and also allowing us to engage based on our own background and culture and whatever, the way fables do. Fables are like, there was a fox and there was a hen house or whatever. That's also a very Carolinian thing, the fox and the hen house. I don't think that's a real fable. Sorry. But yeah, fables do that. I just can't happen to think of one right now in the moment other than like Southernisms. So we have this specific vague thing, and then we also have this portal to a different world. So we have the main character standing on this threshold. So whenever you're looking at kind of magical, fantastical, even science fictional things, there's usually a threshold where the person has to kind of achieve something in order to pass through. They have to be initiated or and initiated can mean many things. It can mean they passed a test, but whatever it is, they have to do something in order to pass through. So if we think about even like Harry Potter, the threshold to the otherworldly side of the story would be that wall in the train station. If I were a bigger fan, I would know the whatever, but it's like 5 3/8 or some kind of fraction. And he had to run through that wall in order to get to this other side. So the threshold for him isn't like a huge deal, but it's still like an act of faith, and it's also a piece of knowledge that if you don't know where it is, you can't find the gate, right? So you have to know, and then you have to do the action, which is scary, but it still gets you to the other side. Here in this particular poem, we have, and portals look like all kinds of things. They might look like a wall you have to run into, but they could just, they could be anything. And that portal, the other world, can look like anything. So it's not necessarily the magical school or the place with wizards and whatever. It could just be very different from the world that came before. So it could be you transporting into a different time period. So like that kind of thing. Anyway, sticking here, we have this threshold, and it's on the edge of the huge expanse. So the shore of the ocean. So even in the way she's describing it, it's almost impossible to imagine the edge of the edge. What is the edge of the edge? What is the shore of the shore? And then what is the big ocean? So we know we're talking in this kind of abstract way, in this kind of metaphysical way, and even as she's painting this threshold for us, the threshold itself is so expansive that we imagine that the world beyond is even more expansive, right? And all of that is just held right there in those moments where we're talking about the shore, a shore of the shore of some great ocean, and some great ocean being one of many, right? So there's so much beyond that we can't even imagine. And so the most precise description she can use to communicate, like a Nostradamus type, like seeing into the future, and you don't really have the words to explain this to the people in your time period. It kind of feels like that, where she the young girl or the narrator is seeing into this space where she then has to describe it for people who won't get it. Interesting. So we have this portal, this acts in the fable mode. It adds to the fable mode. We have the way the portal or the threshold is described. We have the supernatural presence, fable. We have the impossible dream, and it starts this book, and the poem itself exists, or I'll say the poem exists in this place of in-between. So we have this youth and death, together in this contradictory way, or youth and transcendence, which can also be contradictory. We have the beginning and the ending happening at the same time in this poem. The known and the unknown, the physical and the spiritual, all of this is contained in this one moment of time. And so this indicates to us what may happen in the rest of the book, where we know we're dealing with a physical space, but there's going to be commentary on the metaphysical. We know there's some aspect of youth happening here, but also grounded in, I don't want to say death, I want to say something that has existed for a long time. I guess youth, I don't want to say experience, I don't want to, there's a better word for this, but youth and opposite of youth, but containing knowledge and wisdom and experience and all that other stuff. We know we're gonna, well, this poem indicates that we'll experience that in the rest of the book. And it also indicates that we are dealing with a book that is going to tap into some magical realism, some beliefs that may not be supported by Western science. So even the next poem deals with chariots, and then we have the brick walls, black women as brick walls, black women as predictors. We end with the flying African, who is a woman. That makes me wonder. I need to write that down. I need to figure out how many flying African women we have in our literary tradition. Let me put a box around that, because there's space for that. Then finally, I know this video is going on a little bit, but let's talk about the theme for a second. We know that the book is going to show a reverence for elders, and we get that indication in the magnificent beings, or magnificent legs, the greatest names, those kinds of epithets, those greatest names, the largest ears. Vague and specific. But anyway, we're going to get this reverence for elders. We're going to get a reverence for the great unknown, for, like we talked before, the existence of something magical in regular people, something spiritual and physical in the physical. We're also going to get the point of view, at least from what's indicated by the first poem, the point of view of a girl who is confounded by the world she lives in. I think this is the start of the brown girl, which you see later in her other books, this brown girl that appears and reappears and isn't quite nailed down as a character. And I feel like, okay, here's a task, write a brown girl poem that nails her down as, like, that kind of gets us to who she is right now. As far as I can tell, she is a, what do you call this? An archetype, which is great, but, like, I don't know. I think it's a good writing prompt. Write her as an archetype or write her as a regular person. It's a good writing prompt. But also, this is a place where you can kind of imagine that this is a character that Nikky Finney is going to continue returning to. It's a character that exists in a larger way in the scope of her ideology, right? So with that being said, then you, like, when you see a young girl appear, you know that she's important in a way that exists beyond just this poem or this book. We get the theme of the impossible wish. This book begins with a wish being denied, it ends with a wish being fulfilled, and then the question is whether it is denied or fulfilled in a way that results in transcendence or in a way that results in death or in some other way that I haven't thought of. That's a question that I have. This poem indicates to me that because of that, the rest of the book is going to question or be concerned with correcting the way characters are seen. Even she, the young girl, has an issue with the way people see her, always being lauded upon, always made mention, like her beauty. She wants even herself to have no eyes. So there's an issue with the way people are seen and the way people are the way people are seeing and the way people are being seen, that I think will reappear in the text. There's a question around remembering older insightful things, right? That's one of her wishes, to remember only older insightful things, right? Which can be people, can be moments. And so the book, to me, is the act of remembering these older insightful things. It's the act of recording it for whatever, posterity or just for herself, whatever, what have you. But the book is the act of doing that. And so one question I had when I read the poem was, oh, if she wants to remember these things, what's she trying to forget? What's she trying to forget? And as I thought about it more, it's not about forgetting things. It really just is about remembering insightful things, even if those insightful things are a tragedy. So when we get to the poem, oh, I just thought of this. The poem, I think the guy, I'm gonna, before I get the name wrong, Flashing Lights. I feel like his name is Michael. That's it. On page 26, when we get to Empty Sockets, there's a space when we're talking about remembrance here in the book and in this poem, where even tragedies are valuable and insightful and should be remembered. So we get to 26 Empty Sockets, and then he has no eyes, but in a way that they were taken from him. So now I want to go back and think about this no eyes thing and how it relates to him a little bit deeper, but I won't do that now. So remembering older insightful things, regardless of how they make you feel. And there's also a theme of lineage, being a part of a lineage of magnificent beings who were once in her shoes, her being the younger girl. And the reason I think that is because of the way the first poem focuses on these either ancestors or supernatural beings or whatever they actually are, because, you know, the poem does a great job of really describing them and not describing them. But these magnificent beings at the end, in the only place that has traditional capitalization, punctuation, and the only place in the poem that has a direct quotation, the magnificent beings say, they erase her without a trace, wash her away. She's already on the edge of the edge. Like, she got herself to this point, this younger girl. She got herself to the edge of the very edge. And even if you think about this as a cliff, like if you're on the edge of a cliff and then you're on the edge of the cliff, like you already got yourself to this point. One question I had was like, why would they wash her away? But she's already gotten herself to the point where she could like very easily slip away. So I don't know if they, the magnificent beings, like really did something to her by washing her away when she had worked herself to that position. But anyway, that wasn't the point. But she, to save her the pain, the disappointment, to save her, one, the pain, two, the disappointment, two things, right? Everyone, they insisted, does not accept what is possible as well as the rest of us. So when that us came in, it made me think, well, who is the rest of us? The rest of us, who does that include? Does it include only these, the greatest names? Or like, why are they comparing themselves to her, right? And if they are, then there must be some kind of similarity. So it made me think that they were part of the same lineage, that this is a kind of ancestral thing and they were at one point in her shoes. You may have a different interpretation of that, but that's what makes me think that the rest of the book is going to talk about lineage in a way that is comparing the younger girl to the greater names, in maybe not the greatest names, but the greater names. And then that quote comes in the place where traditionally in a fable, it would be the moral of the story. And so it just brings up more questions for me, and which is great for the beginning of the book. But it brings up questions for me. What it has so much emphasis. It's the last part. It's the last part of the poem. It has traditional punctuation, capitalization, all that stuff. It's a direct quote. It has all this emphasis it's in the place where the fable would normally be, but it's not a clear moral of the story. It's not a clear lesson. It leaves me with more questions. And so questions about her, about them, about why the wish needed to be denied, all kinds of questions. Anyway, so we're at 20 minutes. I'll stop here. But that is the first poem. What are your thoughts?